In this video, we are going to talk about writing a thesis and the introduction and what that will encompass for your students. A thesis for the ACT and later even in college for an argumentative essay is very different than the three-pronged thesis that students are used to writing for just a traditional 5-paragraph essay. The three-pronged thesis kind of previews what the essay's body paragraphs will discuss. An argumentative essay is simply stating the stance of the author. So we want to steer clear of using I, me, we, she, those types of pronouns in our thesis, as well as our essay, but especially our thesis. It's fine if students are just starting out, just learning, and trying to become better writers and using that kind of as a crutch in the beginning. But we want to, as teachers, show them that they didn't need the I believe statement in a thesis when really they could just leave that out and they have a solid thesis without it. Sometimes it's hard for a student to realize that and they really want to start off with I believe. Again, it's fine if they do that as long as they go back and take it out to rework their thesis for that to be not included. So if we look at this first thesis, I believe the use of technology is hindering our society today. Well, the use of technology is hindering our society today is a position. It's a stance. It's showing one of the perspectives, and that's the perspective that this student is going to be arguing. We don't need the I believe, but you can see how the student used it as kind of a crutch to write their actual thesis. So we would want to just teach them to go through, strike that out, that it's not necessary, and that the use of technology is hindering our society today is a thesis. The second thesis, technology is bad for humans, while it's not using a pronoun like I, it still is not a solid thesis for an argumentative essay because it's very short, and bad can mean a lot of different things. It's very broad, and while you don't want to write your paper in your thesis and be super specific, you also want to use better word choice and vocabulary, and just saying technology is bad for humans, that's not what ACT is looking for, and that shouldn't be what you as a teacher is looking for either. This third thesis, again, we'll start with I believe the reliance on technology is hindering communication in our society. Again, fine if the student wants to begin that way, but then show them that they didn't need that crutch at all, that they had a thesis without needing to do that. So again, an argumentative thesis is not a three-pronged thesis. It is just a statement. It is the statement of the student on what the position that they're going to be arguing. So this last thesis, the recent reliance on technology is hindering society in both the workforce and the way in which we communicate. That is a thesis that we don't really have to edit because they didn't use a pronoun, and it is discussing the stance that they have taken and a few of the topics that they're going to discuss in the paper, which are the two that the prompt discussed in those kind of background sentences that I pointed out in the first video. That robots build cars rather than having workers build them, phone conversations are over the phone or through Skype, and even buying groceries is all virtual. So we have 3 theses here that would work for this paper. Again, this one is not great, not good vocab, and it's a little bit short. So we want to use one of these theses in our introduction. Now your introduction paragraph should be about 3 sentences long, which again is a kind of outside of the norm of that 5 to 7 sentences that we teach kiddos as they're learning to write. A lot of times when you're not using a 3-pronged thesis, you don't have that much to put in your introduction that isn't going to be specific information that really should be included in the body paragraphs, or that isn't just repetitive terms and sentences just to get that count up. So we want to kind of look for a 3 to 4 sentence introduction. I'm going to show you what a 3-sentence introduction looks like. So you'll want to have a lead-in sentence, maybe include an additional information sentence that kind of is a good transition between the lead-in and your thesis. If you're going to incorporate 4 sentences, maybe that 4th one would be a transition sentence after the thesis. But it's not always necessary. It just depends on the type of writer that your student is. And again, some of them will need a little bit more of a crutch of information, especially starting out. So our introduction, we're going to look for 3 to 4 sentences. A lead-in sentence that introduces the topic, maybe a sentence of additional information, and then your thesis, which is the statement that of stance that the student is taking. So I've written a 3-sentence introduction here. Technology today is very different than the technology of yesterday. preview of what what the essay is going to be over, which is technology in today's world, and it being maybe different than technology in the past. So that is our lead-in sentence right here. Technology today is very different than the technology of yesterday. Recently, technology has become such a large part of our lives that many are now questioning the cost of such strides in regards to our lives. So that is kind of additional information. And as I read it aloud, it's actually a little bit redundant to have our lives and our lives. So I might go back, if I were the student, I might go back and look at it again. So recently, technology has become such a large part of our lives that many are now questioning the cost of such strides. Strides to our society would be a better way. To end that sentence. Again, great to edit as you work with your students. So we have our lead-in sentence, we have an additional information, and then we have our thesis. The reliance on technology is hindering society in both the workforce and the way in which we communicate. So that is our thesis. So altogether, we have technology is very different than the technology of yesterday. Recently, technology has become such a large part of our lives that many are now questioning the cost of such strides to our society. The reliance on technology is hindering society in both the workforce and the way in which we communicate. I know exactly what this essay is going to be over, and I know the stance that the student is taking, the perspective that they're going to be arguing. Again, you might want to include a fourth sentence of transition or even 2 sentences of additional information to kind of transition to your thesis. But a 3 to 4 sentence introduction is what we're looking for on the ACT, because again, it's timed, it's 40 minutes, and your student should not get hung up on the introduction. And so many of our students really kind of look at a prompt and get so bogged down. So it's really important that we teach them now that they don't need to write 5 to 7 sentences. They can write a good 3-sentence introduction and then move on to their body paragraphs. Certainly if they have time and they feel like it is a little bit thin, they can go back, look at it, edit, add another additional sentence or sentence of transition. But we want them to move on from each of the paragraphs they have about 30 minutes to write all 5 paragraphs. So we want them to spend about 6 minutes per paragraph. And the body paragraphs are going to be a little bit longer, and those are going to be a little bit more trickier to write for the student. So we want to make the introduction and conclusion as easy as possible for them to write. That way they still do have that 5 minutes at the end to go back and edit, vamp, check their vocabulary, punctuation, all of that stuff. So this is a great introduction, a good formula for the introduction, and ways to write the thesis, especially if they do use that crutch of the I believe statement. Show them that they don't necessarily need that because they wrote a thesis directly after it. Hopefully this helps.